Okay. So we are recording now.
Thanks very much, Martin. And hello and well, welcome to, I guess you could call it the inaugural AKASHA Conversation. Conversation is close to our hearts. One of my heroes, a lovely chap called Esko Kilpi, said that conversation is where the work is done. Everything else is just mere routine. So this is where we'll explore and form a collective mind to see if we can push the boundaries together in ways that we couldn't do individually. My name is Philip Sheldrake. I'm a researcher at the AKASHA Foundation. And for those of you who don't know the foundation, I guess you could describe it as dedicated to the social aspects of what's become known as Web3, if you like, with a focus on developing systems for freedom of mind and human connection. So that lands us bang smack in the middle of what you could call decentralized social networking. We are starting this in a Zoom format, as you will know if you were here before we started recording, which is incompatible with conversation. So we will have two experts present their perspectives, and then we'll switch to a Zoom format, which means that everybody can contribute equally, as should be the case. So, as the slide here points out, the AKASHA Conversation is a regular webinar where we explore critical questions about decentralized social networking. In fact, probably almost define it, because no one has effectively scaled social networking in a decentralized manner before. There are some platforms out there that we can riff off and learn from, but you know, we are contemplating the never before done. And I guess in terms of this conversation right now, a few themes come to mind. Firstly, that decentralizing is merely a means and not the ends, which of course then invites the question, what are the ends? Which is then followed by, and how do we get there? And how do we recognize and deal with the plain fact that with the rights of participating in something so potentially empowering come responsibilities? In effect, we're kind of contemplating, how can I put this? Yeah, we're basically contemplating saying, yeah, decentralized social networking, we don't need a corporate with 50,000 moderators on payroll. So how do we substitute for the fact that we don't have 50,000 moderators on payroll? Well, today, Martin Etzrodt, my colleague at AKASHA, and Dr. Amy Hassanov are going to open up our first conversation. And then we're going to go to open up the floor, and we should have 70 odd good minutes together. But before I invite them to get going, I just wanted to situate this particular webinar here in December 2021 with the fact that we'd like to host one of these every single month. And as you can see on this slide, we are now looking at making the entirety of Q1 dedicated to the kind of topic of moderating. In January, how do communities look after themselves? In February, we're going to ask the question, well, who decides? And who decides? Who decides? A favorite phrase of a friend of AKASHA, Ted Rao. And in March, then we can effectively say, well, how might technical code support the social codes? And this is very much a journey rather than a destination, and we're going to kick that off right now. So Martin is going to outline our first small steps on this journey. You'll note for yourselves that this won't take us too very far into the future. We've just started. It's not what you might call scalable, but what might we mean by scalability in the decentralized social networking context? How might we explore this uncharted territory together? So Martin's presentation will be followed by an eye-opener, or perhaps a mind expander, where Amy will, who I'll introduce properly at that point, will just make us perhaps think about social media moderating in a slightly different way. Now, I can sense that we can build some real collective intelligence in this community on these conversational calls. But of course, there's no way we're going to solve this together in 75 minutes. but we can make, I sincerely believe we can make progress towards this month in and month out. And hopefully it's the kind of conversation, kind of design challenge that's going to press everybody's buttons who joins these calls. So, Martin, do you want to kind of get everybody up to speed on where we are so far?
Perfect. So when we started, before I go into explaining the way we approach moderating right now, I just share with you the starting page, landing page of Ethereum World Alpha as it's today. Ethereum World, the way we see it is a new kind of social network that we define, or we call it a decentralized autonomous social network. So that means we really want to hand this to the community that is going to form around that particular one, now Ethereum World. But there's also the intention to have, using a framework that is being developed at the AKASHA Foundation, to have gazillions of social networks that can emerge from that, different worlds, if you want. and we believe that the communities that are having conversations in these worlds should also be the ones governing it. That means there's no top-down structure. There's no for-profit entity or behind that. It's really just the community. So in a way, we could define it as kind of a public good, with the exception that this is a public good that would be non-excludable and non-rivalrous. There's no really resource limits in that. For those of you that haven't tried it yet, the alpha, you can send me a private message or an email, and we are happy to also share invite codes with you so that you can try it. This is as it looks as of today. It's kind of a microblogging format platform, but we want to enable Ethereum-based applications to be integratable into this. And so this is going to grow over time. But to start, we started with this microblogging format. So when we started that alpha, we needed to have a quick fix, a quick way to ensure that even if it's in an invite-only mode, we are able to moderate, to make sure that the platform can be looked at by many people, and they do not find it, the content they find there offensive, or it's taken over by certain groups. So what we believe moderating is it's a subset of governing that structures participation in a community to facilitate cooperation and prevent abuse, and that's what we believe. But we have a problem here, and that is right now it's just us moderating. Okay, so it is only the AKASHA team, and that's not ideal, and this has to change. But this is, as I said, just the beginning, and it was a quick fix. So the way we approach it is that we have written a code of conduct that defines how we are taking moderation actions. That is certain criteria, like if we find spam, cryptocurrency shilling, malicious links, impersonation, and a list of different topics that are defined in our code of conduct would be reasons to be flagged by participants of the platform, and then we would take an action on it. There is a way for every post to enable the community to signal if they are not agreeing with a post. You can flag posts, and then you can either choose one of those reasons listed in the code of conduct, or you can also choose other and write your own explanation. And reported posts will disappear for the reporter, but they will remain visible until a moderation decision has taken place. We have then also accessible via the profile icon a moderation history that allows everyone at any time to see what activity has been happening on the moderation side, if a post got delisted and by which moderator, that's, for instance, a contentious question. Is it a good idea to expose a moderator in that way? If a post was kept, you can still see it, but you see that a flag has occurred, and you might want to revisit it then. And that's exactly, so that's what happens when you click on one of these moderated posts. You see this post has been delisted, and the moderator has to leave an explanation. However, the content of the post is also removed. Right now, it's not visible for the non-moderators what type of content that was that got moderated. You could contact the moderator. That's something, again, where maybe this is not entirely in the light of full transparency, because if stuff disappears and the majority cannot see it anymore, that might be problematic. And then, yeah, if a post is not moderated or it was not agreed by the moderator, you can still view the post. And then this is a view on the moderation interface, and that's a real world example of a post that got flagged by a number of users, and then we decided to take it away from the feed. You see here, this moderation decision could be now reviewed. So another moderator coming in would just turn this over. There
Martin,
again, some imperfections. Yeah.
Martin, just clarify, the redactions on the screen right now would not be there if you were looking at the log history, the moderating history.
Of course, yeah.
So why have you redacted it here then, if it's accessible through the
exactly
platform?
Yeah, that was a good discussion we had before with Philip, like, why are we redacting it here although it's fully transparent? And yeah, that's true. So that's exactly maybe one of the topics we could discuss then in our conversations, like to what extent is an activity of a moderation, like in a certain community, something that needs to be, I mean, done in a privacy preserving way?
Well, you felt it was right to do that on something that was going to be recorded and put into other domains other than the social network. But at the same time, neither of us could quite express why we felt it was right to do that here, but then still allow it to be visible. So, you know, these questions about understanding what is the right thing to do are, well, they're critical conversations that should play out for each community in each context as suits their social norms, I guess. How do we code for that? But sorry to interrupt your flow.
Yeah,
I love that point, that conversation we had earlier today.
Exactly. Yeah. So here's a couple of open challenges. Some I pointed already out in that interface. It was a quick solution, as I said in the beginning. But here are some questions that I think will be quite cool if we can discuss them. One is, who decides who should be a moderator? I also conducted some interviews understanding how, for instance, in the Reddit communities around Ethereum, moderators become moderators, and that's a let's say a more random process. There are some communities that have, for instance, if it was a company that started a subreddit, and they made a very clear concept where they asked for community members, but also members of their company to become to step up to that task. But in general, the process is not really formalized. It would be nice to find a way that could allow that. Who updates the code of conduct? So we might see disagreement with early and late joiners of a community emerging. We might see certain communities forming within that world that would like to have different content. Where is this going to be? Where's this discussion happening? Where is this reflected? And finally, who continues to design the technology that allows moderation here and in future worlds? If we believe this is going to be another type of Fediverse in a decentralized space, there might be multiple instances of moderation tools that people could use. So these are some of the questions that I think we are not going to all answer today, but we would like to find answers in the next month. Yeah.
Thanks very much, Martin, for that overview of the first few small steps we've made on this journey. And I think that might be an interesting segue then to Amy. Dr. Amy Hasinoff is an associate professor in the Department of Communication at the University of Colorado. She studies gender and sexuality in the context of new media, and she uses media and cultural studies methodologies to investigate how we think about new media and how those ideas affect the way we develop, use, and regulate communication technologies. I'm going to carry on just to embarrass her a little bit more. Her book, Sexting Panic, Rethinking Criminalization, Privacy, and Consent, examines the construction of sexting as a social problem and the responses to it in mass media, law, and education. So thanks very much for joining us, Amy. Delighted to hear the take that you can bring to this conversation.
Awesome. All right. Well, I am going to share my screen if it will let me. Let's find out. Oh, I think it will. Wonderful. Thank you, Zoom, for once. Okay. Thank you so much for having me. And thanks, Martin, for giving that overview to start off here. So first of all, this is a work in progress, and it's also a work that I'm doing with some co-authors. Neil Farsleigh, he's at Berkeley, and Anna Gibson is finishing up her PhD very soon, I think, at Stanford. And this is a project where we try to think about some alternatives to moderation that are some sort of higher level questions. Again, not things that you're going to be able to answer or implement in a month, but hopefully some food for thought and for discussion, hopefully. So for many large platforms and for many community moderators, a lot of the work and the focus and the time is on really defining, identifying, and removing problematic content, as Martin just described, and sometimes also removing user accounts when people sort of repeatedly violate norms. And one thing that we started thinking about was how similar this is to criminal legal systems, that this form of justice really echoes the way we think about justice in a criminal legal context. In that context, the goal is to determine which laws were broken, who broke that law, and really how should they be punished is sort of the key question. And so whether we're talking about sort of typical content moderation, community moderation, or criminal legal systems, there's a few key problems that I think we want to think about. The first one is that there's very little help or satisfaction or focus for the person who's been harmed by the content. Now, so certainly there are some forms of problematic content that don't cause a specific person any direct harm, like it's spam or whatever. It's annoying, but it's not harm. But of course, there are cases where there has been actual harm to a particular person. And so, with offline and online responses, people really do have a wide variety of needs and desires when they themselves have been harmed. And those needs and desires go far beyond just removing the content or just punishing the person who did that harm. Another problem is that these models really prevent the community from grappling with the incident. And there's a criminologist who worked on this problem in the 1970s called Niles Christie, and he argued that courts and lawyers have stolen conflicts from individuals and from communities. And we thought that was a really interesting insight that still applies today, because this means that the people who've been harmed lose the chance to really participate meaningfully in the resolution of those conflicts. And the community loses the opportunity to clarify their norms in response to an incident. So the content just kind of gets reported and removed. And in the criminal legal system, you report a crime, and then if you're lucky, I guess, the person that you reported gets punished. And often in a criminal legal system as well, the person who's been harmed has very little actual meaningful participation. And then the third problem with both of these systems is that there's a lot of evidence that punishment is pretty ineffective. It's pretty ineffective as a deterrent. It's pretty ineffective to sort of rehabilitate anyone or prevent them from doing the same thing again. It's fairly ineffective for changing any community norms that might have facilitated the harm in the first place. And then a final problem with punishment is that people often correctly perceive punishment as arbitrary and thus as unfair. And so they're not going to respond well to it or take it seriously, because punishment is often arbitrary and unfair, essentially. That's certainly true with the criminal legal system. In the US, it is extremely racially biased. There's tons of evidence on that. Other countries have their own unique problems. So a handful of journalists and researchers have been asking, are there other ways to think about online moderation? And one model people have started to turn to in very initial ways is to think about restorative and transformative justice as an alternative model. So restorative justice asks some different questions. And these questions come from Howard Zehr, who has been working on restorative justice through the 80s, 90s, many decades of work. And those questions that he came up with are: who was hurt, what are their needs, and whose obligation is it to meet those needs? And so, of course, we can see how different those questions are than the typical questions we're asking in content moderation and in criminal legal systems. It's really fundamentally not the same questions. And so the goals of these different models are to focus on a much broader range of stakeholders, because in a criminal legal and a moderation context, we often just focus on the piece of content as the problem. In a criminal legal system, we focus on the person who committed the harm, figure out who that was, how to punish them. In restorative and transformative justice, people tend to try to focus on a much bigger range. So in both of these models, the main priority is to understand and meet the needs of the person who has been harmed. That's sort of key to both models of restorative and transformative justice. For the person who did harm, the invitation to that person is to take accountability, to choose to take that accountability, to repair the harm that they have caused in some way that is meaningful and useful for the person who's been harmed. And then on the community side, in restorative justice, typically, the goal is to help a community clarify their norms and values. And with transformative justice, they are especially interested often in helping communities actually change their norms and values and conditions so that that harm doesn't happen all over again. And in terms of how does this work, restorative and transformative justice programs typically, the short answer is there's a lot of conversations, one-on-one conversations, pre-conferences, group meetings, a series of meetings. So this is all through dialogue that this happens. And restorative and transformative justice programs are typically decentralized. They're community specific, and they have a lot of local variation. They exist in many countries all over the world, especially the US, the UK, New Zealand, Australia, especially places where there's been sort of problems with over-policing. Restorative justice has been sort of a response to that tries to reduce the excessive and discriminatory uses of criminal legal systems. Other countries have sort of different models and call it different things, but those Western countries that I just listed use the term restorative justice and have these as diversion programs. Transformative justice tends to be more grassroots, not connected to any institutions. But again, they're all very locally specific. They'd be like through a particular prosecutor's office or a particular grassroots organization that only exists in Oakland, California, for example. Restorative justice programs have been extensively researched and evaluated. There's been some randomized controlled trials that have found that restorative justice programs reduce reoffending more than conventional approaches. They have higher rates of satisfaction for everyone involved, and they reduce post-traumatic stress symptoms for people who've been harmed. And so in our project that I'm going to just tell you about for the rest of my time here today, what we're pursuing is this question of how do we apply these lessons from restorative and transformative justice to online communities. And one way that we're trying to do that is to map some of the differences and similarities between how online moderation is happening currently versus restorative and transformative justice facilitation. So what are the differences and similarities and how those two different forms work? Because we're hoping that this work can help us highlight where future interventions and research needs to go to sort of figure out how to bridge those gaps and bring those two models together. So in other words, our sort of main question is like, how would online communities and platforms moderation practices practices need to change if they were going to reorient towards these types of goals for that restorative and transformative justice has. And the approach we used in this project was to conduct interviews and run participatory design workshops with some moderators and some restorative and transformative justice practitioners and activists. And so what we did was we coded and analyzed the transcripts, and we came up with 3 spectrums that describe the differences and similarities between content moderation and restorative and transformative justice facilitation. So both restorative and transformative justice are primarily concerned with meeting the individual needs of the person who was harmed, as I said, which some moderators actually shared as an approach, but others really saw as outside the scope of their role. So there's a lot of variation between moderators on that point. For some moderators, the focus of intervention was primarily content and only sometimes individuals if the offense was repeated or egregious. Other moderators routinely engaged with individuals to try to help them understand community norms. And similarly, some restorative justice processes do focus more on individuals and then only involve the community as sources of support, or sometimes as like an embodiment of shared values. So if you have a restorative justice, what's called a circle, you might invite in community members to talk about how the incident impacted them in their community. Transformative justice activists, on the other hand, are more consistently seeing the community itself as a site of intervention and change, that they would see like harm has happened. This means there's something wrong in this community. We need to change our community norms. Another one was the mechanisms of how this works. And so some moderators really focused on enforcing rules using automated and manual tools. And their goal was to be as fair and impartial as possible. And of course, at scale, that is sometimes all people can do. But there's also some continuity here with restorative justice, because when our participants discussed a fictional workplace-related incident in the design workshops, we sort of gave them an incident and asked them, how would you respond? Both moderators and facilitators agreed that it might make sense to refer to a professional licensing board for a code of conduct type violation. So thus they're also invoking rules outside the community. It's not to say that restorative and transformative justice facilitators never invoke rules. Do I have like another 5-ish minutes, or how am I doing?
I would love you to continue on the trajectory you're on. I think that will just fuel the conversation. Thank you.
Perfect. Okay, great. Just checking in. Okay, so also community moderators, and I also want to stress, in addition to both sides both groups using rules, community moderators already do, of course, engage in dialogue and try to educate people who've caused harm in some communities, and depending on how their moderation role has been defined. Because we found that some moderators talked about trying to facilitate conversations between people involved in a conflict, which is something that a restorative justice practitioner would definitely do. And this is sort of one of the big challenges of applying restorative justice online, is that it's very resource intensive because it requires genuine dialogue between humans. I'm not sure that there's a lot of opportunity to automate this, to have bots. There may be some way that bots could help sort of streamline workflow, but this is really about dialogue. This is really about connecting with other people's feelings and needs, and really developing empathy and mutual understanding. And I'm personally pretty pessimistic that that could ever be automated, but who knows, maybe we'll get there one day, but I think that's pretty unlikely. And so this is the question of scale that always comes up. How do you scale this? Because it's so resource intensive, because it can't be done through just an AI that's trained to recognize content. It's going far beyond that. And I'm working currently with Nathan Schneider at CU Boulder on a paper of how could we reimagine scale in a way that aligns with these goals and values. And we're trying to work with the idea of subsidiarity. So we can talk more about that, but that's also very much a work in progress. So in terms of the goals for both groups, everyone really wants to stop harm. That's really like the central goal for everyone. Obviously, they don't want bad things on their platform. They want their platform to be a great place to participate where no one is getting hurt. But of course, they pursued different goals to achieve that outcome of stopping harm. So moderators, some of them were really focused on maintaining order in their communities. And this is the case for some restorative justice facilitators. Their process can be more about maintenance, in that they want people who caused harm to repair that harm. That's sort of central to restorative justice, this idea of repairing harm. And of course, this can sort of function to, ideologically, like we're trying to restore things to the way that they were before the incident, because that process of repair asks individuals who caused harm to change, but it doesn't necessarily ask the community to change through that process of repair. So, we've tried to find a way to map this three-dimensionally, but we haven't figured it out yet, to sort of map these three spectrums and put dots in a way that makes sense. So right now they're linear, but I'll just stress that they all overlap. Obviously, this is a complicated model. So this kind of individual change was certainly a goal for some moderators. When I said before, they try to educate, coach, explain community norms to people, try to help them understand and buy into, like, how do we talk to each other on this community, on this platform, in this subreddit, etc. What are our norms? Some moderators will engage in that sort of goal of individual change. And some moderators also did describe processes of working with communities to sort of update rules and update community norms as the community grew and changed. So there is sometimes an aspect of fundamental change over time. The transformative justice activists are definitely more focused on fundamental change as a central goal, especially with community norms, to try to get at some of those root causes. And so in our workshops, some of the participants imagined a series of community conversations that might be a way to address this sort of fictional incident we presented to them of image-based sexual abuse, which it used to be known as revenge porn, if that helps you understand it. And so the idea behind these conversations that they came up with was to try to shift the norms that led to this incident. And in this case, the norms would be sort of basic sexism that they believed had contributed to the incident in the first place, and to the sort of community's response to it, which in our incident was sort of typically victim blaming, which is still a big problem with this type of sexual abuse and harassment. And so our transformative justice facilitators really emphasized that in some cases, really meaningfully addressing harm requires investing in these longer term projects of community transformation, because the assumption is always something bad has happened. We need to like really get down to these root causes, like what conditions enabled this person to think that this was okay. And so there's of course so many continuities that we found between moderators and facilitators, especially between restorative justice and the more attentively moderated sort of smaller communities. We did find a lot of interesting continuities there. There's still a lot more work to do to understand how online communities might be able to really effectively use restorative and transformative justice principles. I think some future research could more systematically and thoroughly investigate how online communities already use aspects of restorative and transformative justice, even if they're not using those words, as well as what resources and policy changes they need to build on the work that they're already doing. Part of the challenge is like finding communities for us as researchers, like finding communities that are doing this type of stuff, because they don't necessarily use those words. It just so happens that a really small, well-moderated subreddit on, I don't know, cat food or whatever might just have like a really great moderation team and a really close-knit community where like we have these norms, we talk about our norms, we help each other, we engage in this form of education, but they're not coming from it from like a restorative justice model. So like finding those communities is hard. So I'll just put it out there. If anyone knows of a community where you think this is happening, let the researcher know. I would love to study you. Another one is for future research is to try to pilot and evaluate a restorative and transformative justice approach. So like design something with a community, pilot it, study it, see how it works. And a third is that, these restorative and transformative justice approaches offline are already decentralized. As I said, I'm really curious how we could apply the lessons from those governance structures that are already very locally specific to a decentralized social network as yours is. So I think that's an interesting place to go for future research. And if anyone wants to contact me with questions, comments, or possible collaborations on anything I've mentioned or anything else you come up with, this is sort of just the beginning for us of thinking about the connections between these two different domains. So thank you very much.
Amy, thank you very much. That's exactly the tonic I think we needed on our very first AKASHA conversation. So thank you again. We're just coming back after Martin and Amy's presentation. And I think, given that this is our very first AKASHA conversation and it's a small, cozy group, we can actually go around and see if everyone would like to say hello and introduce themselves. Theo, I should say.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. So my background is in information systems. I've always been looking at sort of how businesses and organizations can open up, which is called open innovation, and collaborate with users. But then Web3 came around and I was got stuck in DAOs. So I've ever since been writing my master's thesis on DAOs a few years ago. And then currently I'm in the governance working group at VitaDAO. And that's really exciting, just to build up a community from scratch and figure out the governance on the go. Also helping out with Colony on the side and a few other small projects.
Thank you. Anyone else like to say hello? Either in the chat, if that helps, just let us know anything you'd like to share with us about yourself, your organization affiliation, or I know just where you are in the world, or if you prefer, just unmute or put your webcam on and let us know who you are and what you're about.
So I can introduce myself. My name is Mitko. I'm part of AKASHA's team. Obviously very involved and very interested in the topic of moderation and governance, and here to learn and to kind of listen, and yeah, looking forward to being part of some of the next calls, and really see how this conversations start creating excitement and a lot of very valuable insights for us and for the community.
Cheers, Mitko. Hi, Ben.
Hi, I'm Ben. Some of you know me as Zero on the platform.
Ah, it's you.
Oh, Zero.
Yeah,
Are you sure it's you? How do we know it's you?
yeah, I could be an imposter. That's correct.
Welcome.
Thank you very much. I'm here in Florida, and Amy, I used to live in Boulder and Denver both. So missed that area, and I'm here just to listen and learn.
Perfect.
Sweet. It's great to have you here. I don't know if, Samir, you want to say anything in audio, video, or just in text, or not at all? Your choice. In which case?
Maybe I can go. I'm Ligi.
I'm
Martin reached out because I'm moderating Red Ethereum, so I'm interested there, and also interesting in AKASHA. So use the old version, using the new one, trying things out. Yep, and interested to learn.
Cool.
Well, thank you for joining us.
Great. The new version of AKASHA, you can't game it, Ligi, because it doesn't have tokens, But I know you missed the mechanics. I know it was fun.
No, I don't miss. No.
No, I don't know. It's okay. Cool. Yeah.
So I think we've got till, we said 75 minutes, so we've got 1/4 whichever hour that might be for you in the world. And I think we're of a lovely, tight-knit little group, such that I don't really have to do any chairing, do I? I don't have to wait till your thumbs go up or anything. Please just unmute and dive in, or post in the chat as and when it suits. Let's just keep this as free form as possible. But I'm going to start. I'm going to use the chair's privilege to ask Amy a question straight off the bat. First off, thank you for a perspective that you don't often come across when you're talking about social networks, when the context of social network is very much in the Facebook mold, as opposed to, I guess we had social networks pre-digital, right? And some of the things you were talking about there, you would recognize from anyone who's read anything about the history of our species as surely roughly something that our species did for maybe thousands of years. And as we've looked to scale these things up, we've looked to rules that we can automate at scale. So before both you and Martin, both of you presented, I did make a mention about this obsession that techies have with scalability, interoperability. They're like two religions. No, they're not like two religions. It's like one religion with two gods, and we worship at the altar of scalability and interoperability. Perhaps you would argue that actually Facebook proves that they're not scalable. I'd love to have your perspective on those two words.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right that obviously like scale becomes in the tech industry such a central goal, right? Because this is how you become profitable, is you manage to do something and then scale it. And this is the way that you can return value to your shareholders, is through scale. And so it becomes almost an obsession and like just a default of like, well, we can't do it if it won't scale. And so if someone has an idea, could we do something differently? And the response can be like, well, that won't scale. So like, it's not possible. So it's just totally dismissed as an option. And, you know, in this paper with Nathan that I've been working on, and we're still very much in the sort of early draft phase, I think what we're trying to think about with scale is how maybe there's a way to look, and I mentioned the word subsidiarity, to think about, it's not so much not scale, it's not scale, but it is a version of scale that I think has a lot of historical and current examples outside of the online world, like in the sort of offline structure space where, you know, for example, in a criminal legal system, it basically has a subsidiary structure, meaning there are smaller local units that sort of have to, it's a hierarchical model of subsidiarity where a bunch of smaller local units, your district courts, your local courts, report to sort of a higher and US Supreme Court, right? So you have like various districts, things can be appealed, then they go up to higher and higher courts and eventually get to the Supreme Court. This is not to say there are not many problems with criminal legal system in the US in particular, which I alluded to, but I could spend a whole other, I was going to say hour, but like lifetime talking about all those problems. But what's interesting about this criminal legal system is that it is actually has a system of like local units that are part of a larger structure. And when we compare that to social media, which has just pursued sort of a flat scale where it's like everything is almost the same with like little tweaks for like, oh, in India, we're going to ban these words. In Greece, we're going to ban those words. But essentially the approach is scalable because it's something that can just be like slightly tweaked for different localities, but is essentially like a uniform approach to how to deal with content moderation that's so much based on automation and, you know, so much based on having as little human involvement as possible. So all of that to say is like, I think there is a lot of potential for thinking about different models of growth and large networks that are not just based on this uniform scale, but are different. So like a criminal legal system, so restorative justice programs also have, some of them will be like certified by a central training body. And then especially in the UK, there's a training institute where you can become certified. There's other institutes in the US as well, and a couple other countries. And so you can become a trained restorative justice facilitator. So you sort of are expected to uphold some standards and values from there. And then you can apply that in your own local context, which of course it always has to be local to the community, local to the context. And so this is just a way of thinking about, I don't know if it's like not scale in the Silicon Valley, like, you know, growth without cost version of scale, but it is scale in the sense that like it can be large. Like in theory, it can be very large because it's based on a structure of local units that are perhaps accountable to each other, perhaps accountable to a higher, more broader set of abstract principles. There's a lot of different ways you could imagine structuring this, but I think like it could start with sort of this just idea of like local units. So I don't think scale is the way that we think about scale as growth without cost, essentially, or like minimal cost, or like less cost as the growth continues, that gets the dollar signs in people's eyes when they want to like add their VC money to a project. That's not the kind of scale we're talking about, but it doesn't mean that it can't be large.
So you're actually saying that the scaling of human community is not the same as scaling machines. I'm gobsmacked. I am absolutely, you know, seriously, that's sarcasm, British sarcasm for those people who are not familiar with British sarcasm. In fact, I think you might be this might be the academic way, but it's almost like you're being nice to the Web 2 platforms. When you look at your 3 dimensions, locus of intervention, mechanism, and goal, I noticed on goal, you said I'm going to slightly reframe it. On goal, you said Web 2 social networking is kind of like about maintenance and repair. I would say it's more like malignant growth. Just that would be the word I would tend to use. At least the evidence around us is abundant. And for the work you're doing, you're saying actually we should be aiming for scaling human community in a way that's suitable for human community to affect fundamental change. And I, as you were talking, I was thinking more in terms of growth and regeneration and mutual learning. That's all in the mix. So I think the contrast between both sides of your 3 dimensions is greater than perhaps you presented, but you may be doing that for, I don't know, some academic figure that I'm not familiar with as a non-academic.
I mean, yeah, like the spectrums that I presented were based on like what came out of the interviews with the people that we talked to. So we're trying to like stay close to the data in that sense. So maybe that's what you're noticing. But I think your comment is interesting that like malignant growth is an interesting term that I'm gonna write down and think about of like, how might that fit into the model? Because I think like, I mean, I agree with you that like that's what it's been. I think like the question is, what do people, because the sort of spectrums that I presented are what do the people involved think it is. Like if you ask a moderator who's, you know, been hired to moderate like a community for a particular gaming platform or something, they're going to say like, I'm trying to be fair, I'm trying to be impartial, I'm trying to like repair, like, you know, keep this platform clean, keep it attached to the community guidelines. I'm trying to do this work of maintenance to like keep things going on this gaming platform or whatever it is, whoever we're interviewing. And that's how they talk about it. They don't like necessarily, they have critiques certainly, but like we're asking them about like, how do you do your job and how do you think about your job? And I think that's what we were trying to get at. But I mean, I think your observation about like malignant growth versus like, what was the other one you said? Like
a regenerative growth. It's a growth in multiple dimensions, not just in the size of participation.
Yeah.
And in fact, the definition that Martin showed that we use for moderating at the moment, Grimmelman's definition, emphasizes the moderating role as much in the positive feedback loops, seeking cooperation, as the negative, you know, trying to stem poor behavior.
Yeah.
I'm interested in the Reddit moderating perspective, Luigi. I'm wondering if you could throw some light on the amount of time that you might invest in the positive feedback loops versus the negative. Can you illuminate us? Are you there, Luigi? In that case, I'll open.
Yeah.
Hi.
Sorry, can you repeat the question?
Yeah, the question is about moderating being about cooperation as well as preventing abuse. It's about celebrating the positive feedback loops as well as stemming the negative. And I just wondered if you could talk to us about the balance that you experience as a Redditor in terms of the amount of time you spend celebrating and amplifying the positive as opposed to trying to stamp out the negative.
To be honest, it's more quite a negative. You try to keep the positive there, but it's more you have to go through the negative to achieve that. And I'm quite happy there is some negative on the Reddit, but it's not that ugly. I don't know if you've seen like the documentary, The Cleaners, like of the people that really clean out dirty stuff. So we don't see like dead bodies on Reddit Ethereum. We don't see abused children on Reddit Ethereum. So I'm quite happy to not have to go through this pain. But we see some financial stupid bullshit that you have to remove over and over again. And you see human greed, basically people that just try to make money, and you have to remove that over and over again, and spam. And people try to cheat people. So actually it's quite negative. And that's also what I'm wondering, like, and it was also like seeing after, like, for example, watching this documentary, like how do you deal with that? Because there's basically two ways. You can either do it with humans, but then you hurt humans. They are really hurt. Some people hang themselves after seeing some shit. And otherwise you can do it by with an AI. So, but with an AI, do you really want your content to be governed by an AI? So it's basically, you have to either take shit or take shit. So it's, yeah, sorry to be blunt here.
Do you know, no, do you know, this is just the kind of straight speaking that we need, because this is a super wicked challenge, and you're at the cutting edge. I mean,
maybe to extend that, and maybe back to Amy, when you talk about the concept of restorative justice and having like conversations in the community, right? Asking how did this happen? Yeah, that some shit happened. There it seems to be that there are these cases that are just well, that like, can you even have a conversation about this? You know, how would the norms have to change to remove that? This is I'm wondering.
Yeah, I mean, this is a super tricky problem. This is why like no one has a good solution to it yet. I think it's absolutely true that you know, if anyone can join a platform without much barrier, then you're going to have really terrible stuff that appears on that platform that's ranging from completely illegal to just really not appropriate and, you know, being a detriment to the platform. Of course, like there's, you know, there's going to be all that stuff that needs that essentially janitorial work to clean it up. I think one model from restorative justice, and again, this is going to be a real drag on scale, but one model from restorative justice is to use restorative justice as in schools, so in kindergarten through grade 12 schools in particular, and this has been done in a number of different countries. And with those schools, they really try to create what they call like a whole community or whole school approach. And so what this means is that there's kind of an extensive onboarding process, whether you're starting in kindergarten at that school or whether you come into the school at a later grade. There, you don't just sort of walk into the school without any education or norming or sort of understanding about like, what is this school, this community that I'm entering? And of course, with social media platforms, what do you need to join the social media platform is you need a working email address usually. So the amount of onboarding in a community is, let's say, often absent. I'm not sure what Ethereum does actually, but in certainly like most social media platforms, they've sort of defaulted to complete openness, right? And so of course, if anyone can join with an email address, then anyone can put horrible things on that platform. This, of course, for a commercial platform like Facebook, Reddit, Twitter, you know, like the ones that are for profit, right? They, of course, want more users. Like they don't want to limit their user because they want the growth, right? They want the scale. They want to see like users 10xing every day. And if you create like onboarding, whatever that looks like for new users, then you can't have that growth because it's going to take, you know, time for each person to be integrated into the community. In a sort of school approach, there would be like, we start at kindergarten, we start on day one, we talk about what are our norms. Is it okay to hit other kids? Is it not? What happens if you hit someone? We have a conversation, we do a circle, we talk about our feelings. It's a whole thing, right? Like it's a whole, like, I can't stress enough that is like when schools are doing this right, it's a whole thing that involves a lot of steps, a lot of educating new people. And there's, the only reason online communities don't do this is, I think, well, maybe not the only reason, but one of the main reasons is this obsession with scale of like, we just have to grow exponentially. But if a platform is willing to behave a little bit differently, I can really imagine a platform using this sort of whole school approach, not to say that it's a school, but just that it's an approach that is really so attentive to like, you gain privileges as you demonstrate that you're like participating in line with the norms. You can't just post that, you know, you can't just have an email address, join and post spam or garbage or abusive content or child abuse photos or murder photos. I mean, all of the horrible stuff that people just post because they sort of have this kind of, you can just join without any barriers. So I think like that's, you know, that's one approach. It's not an answer for every community and every platform. It may not be practical. It's going to take a lot of resources. You know, the schools are dedicated to it, but they often have a person whose job it is to sort of oversee these kind of programs, to help the teachers implement them. This is why I'm trying to say like, it's a whole thing, but it works really well because there's a lot of good evidence that in schools that have these kind of programs, they have a lot fewer incidents of violence. They have a lot lower dropout rates. There's all sorts of data on how this really can work. So this is an approach that would align with restorative justice. It's, again, that one is hard to scale.
Yeah, there's one, I mean, why we having this entire conversation now, right, is that we see we have a big urge to have this happen before anything we are doing actually scales dramatically. Yeah. So right now we really control through the invite codes that have no other purpose than just controlling the onboarding. Some people think maybe they are like a token or something, but they're not. So they really just control the floodgate. Yeah, and we need to have that fixed before that floodgate opens. But honestly, from what you just now said, it's dawning to me that maybe we should never open that floodgate in a way. It's like the question a bit like what type of tool or utility, let's say, you could derive from such a thing like a world, like an AKASHA framework, AKASHA created social community. Yeah.
You just asked another question out loud,
a
rhetorical question. No, I'll just say, because you asked 3 questions in your presentation about who decides who's a moderator, who updates codes of conduct, who continues to design and keep evolving the socio-technological moderating system in a community. These are all great questions, and I'm thinking actually now, one of the best things we could do is have go round here and invite everybody not to provide an answer, but actually to contribute another question to the mix, because I think we're at the phase where we're still collecting the questions, let alone trying to necessarily answer them. Would anybody like to contribute a question that they think we should be grappling with as a community, asynchronously and synchronously into 2022? On the topic of moderating, of course. Hello, Ed. You look like you were going to say something, and you just arrived, and I just wanted to say hello, and please pipe up and let us know who you are.
Hi everyone. Yeah, sorry, it's a smaller group. I was expecting there to be more people and that I wouldn't be talking at all, and I was just going to join and see what was going on. But hi, nice to meet you all.
Likewise, mate.
I've a big interest in this, and I suppose I've been blogging, and I suppose I'm coming at it from kind of the decentralized angle, and I suppose the question I would like to throw into the mix is just, who is the gatekeeper, and is this community, like, who is the gatekeeper going to be, and like, what is the purpose? Is this kind of, is it kind of like the concept of a Web 2 where there's gatekeepers and of the platform, or is it going to be more decentralized from the point of view it's going to be more Web 3, there's no kind of gatekeeper, and decentralized communities grow and thrive on it, or I suppose that's kind of my question.
Thank you very much. I'm just going to try and capture those in the chat there, but please feel free to reword the way I've just captured your question there if you think I haven't done it justice. Any other questions that we think we should be queuing up right now?
I have a question, because I was trying to think what are the current biggest challenges when it comes to the moderation, and one thing that is coming up is usually the different cultural perceptions of what is a good content, what is a hate, content, and how this is going to be, I don't know, what will be the red flags, how it's going to separate between something that is like, quality content and not a hatred speech for one culture and perceived in a completely different way from another culture. I think that's probably something that I'll be interested to know.
Thank you very much. I'm going to do the same here, and feel free to edit or add a different version of that question. Mitko, anybody else want to pose some questions here?
I'm curious about this restorative justice idea, and if there is a perpetrator that does something terrible on the platform, how could we actually have some kind of method for making amends towards the group or the person that was perpetrated against? It seems very difficult to me, but an amazing idea if it could be implemented.
Well, actually, as Amy's here right now, I wondered if you have any potential quick answer to that.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I'm happy to give thoughts on any of these questions. I didn't know if you were like wanting to collect them all first, but I'm happy to
just go for it. I love this organic thing. Yeah, please jump in.
So your question about like is your question kind of like what does amends or repair look like? Is that sort of what the question is?
Yeah, on a platform specifically.
On a platform in particular. Yeah, I mean, so what's interesting about restorative justice and getting into this research, and especially getting into the research on people who've been harmed, like what do they actually want to happen? And there's a lot of different research in a lot of different contexts. And so many of the things people want are not actually material things. They're things that can happen can happen in an online context, they can happen in an offline context. So the things people tend to want when they've been harmed, and this is just sort of broadly across different forms of harm, is they often want a sincere apology. They often want someone to really understand what the person did caused harm, what that harm was, why it was a big deal to them, and for them to really acknowledge that honestly and genuinely, not a fake apology, a real one, and to really feel that that person understands that it was wrong and that it caused harm, and to understand that and to have that be part of an apology. People also want a recognition from their community that they were the one who was harmed. And because often with certain types of harm, people will blame the person who was harmed rather than the person who caused the harm, especially with forms of gendered and sexual violence, but certainly not exclusively. There's victim blaming in all sorts of forms of harm. And so what people often want is an acknowledgement from their peers and from their community. You were harmed, that other person did a bad thing. So that sort of community recognition, which to some extent happens in a criminal legal system when the system says you are guilty of offense X. So that's kind of one of the things that the legal system can do, sort of, though people often don't find it as satisfying when it's coming from their direct community, but it can come from like a judge or a jury or a plea bargain, sort of. But of course, the whole criminal legal system is set up for the person who did the harm to deny it as long as possible, because that's what your lawyer will tell you to do, is like, if you don't want to go to jail for as much time as possible, you always have to be on the defensive, right? Because like that's the right decision given the criminal legal system. Even if that person knows that they caused harm and feels bad about it, they're never going to be able to say that to the person who was harmed. And so there's such a missed opportunity for healing for the person who was harmed. And all those things can happen in an online context if the person who caused that harm is willing to engage. Another thing that people often want is repair. So like, what can that look like? Sort of an example from sort of classic restorative justice from Howard Zare is like, a teenager like does graffiti on someone's fence and it's private property, and you know they could have been sent to juvenile detention, which they totally would in the United States, especially if they were non-white. But instead, we're going to send them to a restorative justice program. They're going to meet with you know, some facilitators one-on-one. They're going to learn why Mrs. So-and-so was upset about her fence getting graffiti on it. They're going to meet with maybe Mrs. So-and-so if she's willing, and some community members. And then they're going to find out, oh, this teenager is actually a wonderful artist. let's, you know, use that art skill as an outlet to paint a beautiful flower mural on Mrs. So-and-so's fence. And so the person has acknowledged the harm, apologized for it. Mrs. So-and-so has heard from the community that, like, we're not okay with private property destruction. That would be the value in that community that the teenager needs to learn about. And then the benefit is, like, the teenager paints over the graffiti and provides, like, beautiful flowers. This is like a very simple example, but the point is that, like, repair could take different forms. It could be a service, it could be money, it could be, like, apology can in itself be a form of repair, because it's like kind of making things right by saying, I did something wrong, I hurt you in these ways, I regret it, I am sorry. Like, so it's I think most of it does, like, I'm not sure I can think of much that can't be done in an online context in terms of those amends or those forms of repair.
Amy, thank you very much, and Ben, thank you for the question. I'm going to bring proceedings to a close, if only because I've learned that people will always come back to a conversation that is known to start and finish on time. And of course we do hope that you'll come back as we just wait for that output to go straight onto our window. We do hope you come back, because this is, as I said at the top of the call, a journey, not a destination. Any of you who are not on Ethereum World, our private alpha, do take up Martin's invitation and ping him for an invite code. That would be awesome. And we also have a Discord channel if you want to continue the conversation asynchronously. And I can see my colleague about to grab the Discord URL and stick it in the chat here.
Actually, we are also planning to have a discourse, which, by the way, is also a great platform that allows asynchronous and actually quite very healthy conversations. Apparently, actually quite curious to learn why that is, and we could have an analysis on that as well. Yeah, but that's for follow-up. So as we said, we will have another series of calls in the next year. We will learn from this one. We will probably use the better Zoom configuration next time, and also have a better announcement in advance. So in late January, probably there will be a follow-up on that. When we will.
I mean, that's the one thing that just I think about, or that draws me to having these conversations with as many multi-talented, multidisciplinary individuals as possible, is that this is not a techno-solutionist gathering. There are other calls you can join for that. We want the regenerative growth. We want to bring out the best of humanity in community, so that the community can best serve the individual. So, you know, this is what drives us. May this be an interdisciplinary conversation, forming a beautiful collective mind. That would be wonderful. You know, to that point, do ask yourself who else should join this conversation as we continue in Q1 next year. And of course, then do let them know if you think that they should be here. But it is 76 minutes, 1 minute past our 75 slot. So I will just finish by thanking Martin and thanking Amy for informing and inspiring our very first conversation. Hope to see you at the next one. Do check out our Discord and of course Ethereum World and our Twitter for information about when we can pull the first one together in January. Thank you very much, everybody. Take care. Have a lovely rest of the day wherever you are.
Bye-bye.
Take care.